Welcome to TYT Interviews. I'm Wes Clark Jr., and tonight I'm joined by Khanna, who's running for Congress in California's 17th District. Welcome to the Young Turks.
Thanks for having me on.
Pleasure to have you. Now, so you don't have to toot your own horn too much. I did a little bit of research on you online. And
hopefully the good parts.
Oh, no, only the good parts are easily found on Google. So just correct me if I'm wrong. Phi Beta Kappa from University of Chicago, Yale Law School. You ran in 2003, probably a little too soon, post-war, but the whole point of your running was against Tom Lantos because he voted for the Iraq War.
Right.
So you were one of the first anti-Iraq War candidates out there, even though it didn't happen at the time.
Yes.
And then you helped Obama run for his state Senate seat?
I just knocked on doors. I was a student at University of Chicago and was one of many people who knocked on doors for him.
But then that kind of paid off later when you worked at the Commerce Department as deputy
assistant secretary. Long title.
It's a long title, but it's a big deal because you're working in trade issues, especially with tech issues for overseas and really earning revenue for American companies and American workers.
I'm saying manufacturing and what the future of manufacturing and manufacturing exports will look like. It was a great experience.
So just in case you think, okay, God, that's great, he's really qualified, but let's go even one step further. So you also helped save auto manufacturing plant?
In my local community, there was NUMMI, which had employed tons of manufacturing jobs, and it shut down, unfortunately. There was a huge debate in the community. Do we just go to residential housing and developing, or do we keep it a manufacturing facility? And I was part of a team in the administration that brought back Grant in Fremont and said, look, we got to keep this a manufacturing facility. Ultimately, Tesla came in through multiple people's efforts, and we were able to retrain some of the folks who were laid off to get jobs in manufacturing and keep that a manufacturing facility. And
you're also you're teaching at UC Santa Clara Law, and you're also teaching economics at Stanford.
I've been teaching. I haven't been teaching at Santa Clara, but I have been at Stanford for 4 or 5 years now as a lecturer in economics, and it's great. It's
so you actually know what you're talking about on a lot of issues.
That's you know, I mean,
well, no, but
that'll be for the viewers to decide.
But you have the real world experience that you've worked in some of these issues. You know a little bit of the deeper reasons and causes of our non-competitiveness or advantages in competitiveness in different fields.
And that's my hope in being active in public life, is to try to bring more depth, reason, thought into some of these issues that we're going to get into.
Well, let's get into first issues on your background and just because I'm going to say, I mean, now that we know you went to UC Chicago and you went to Yale and the question is, were you born in the United States? You could run for president in a couple of years.
Oh, please.
No, but seriously, you were born in the United States.
Yeah, I've got a birth certificate.
There is
Philadelphia.
There is that option in a few years if you still like politics that the right markers have been checked. But what pushed you into deciding to get involved in politics in the first place?
So my inspiration actually was my grandfather, and he was part of the Indian independence movement in the 1940s. He spent 4 years in jail with Gandhi and the Quit India movement. And when I was young, even though I was born in Philadelphia, I'd visit and he'd tell stories about his fight for human rights. He dedicated 35 years of his life to that. It gave me a sense that politics mattered. It shaped extraordinary destinies of the world. And then America matters in the world. And so that was my initial interest in public service. Of course, since then, running in Silicon Valley, the heart of innovation and globalization, I've been interested in issues of what's happening to people with automation and globalization. How are we going to create competitiveness, opportunity, and what is really going to emerge as a thoughtful economic policy.
To go into some of these issues a little bit deeper, is it trade that's caused the loss of jobs in manufacturing in the United States, or has it been technology?
I think it's both in some sense. I think part of it is automation, right? Manufacturing, as you know, in this country has quadrupled in output since 1980 to 2010. So we make 4 times what we were making in 1980. And at the same time, we're we're almost 6 times as productive as China. China, 40% of its GDP makes about 20% of the world's output. In our country, 10% of our GDP, manufacturing, makes almost equal to China in output. So why have we had this huge loss of jobs? Because the productivity has increased, so part of the jobs have been automated. Part of the jobs have been outsourced, and the question is, what type of manufacturing can we keep in the United States? And this is where I think we need more nuance, right? I mean, politicians get up and say, okay, we want manufacturing in the United States. The question is, what type of manufacturing is sustainable? How are we going to educate and train people for the jobs that are actually going to exist in the future? There are several theories that I have and would love other people's thought. One is last mile manufacturing. So we know that people, when they save the transportation costs, even if stuff is assembled offshore, to put the finished product is extraordinarily expensive to ship, and you can't have the IP protection. So companies are doing the last mile manufacturing in the US. That's something we can do. Advanced manufacturing, CNC machines, robotics, niche manufacturing. So the point is, not all manufacturing can stay here, but there are certain types of jobs they can.
Are there certain fields that the U.S. won't be competitive in the future because we haven't opened up our legal system or trade regulations for it? I'm thinking specifically like biotech. I've got a lot of friends in the biotech industry,
Right.
and they're all on a plane to India all the time because they can get the work done there.
Right. Well, I think that there are areas where we should be educating and training people in the skills to be advanced in manufacturing. Let me give you one thing that we don't do as well. When you look at one of the problems with H-1B visas and why people are outsourcing this is they have project teams, right? So they have a team of people already trained. So someone's at Cisco or someone's in biotech, and they'll say, I want to solve this problem. Give me 6 people. Here's the team. If one person isn't working, they'll replace them. And we haven't thought in our country yet, how are we going to have that kind of expertise and team and training of people for those skills here? And I think it's emerging. People are starting to think about that, and that's why some of the manufacturing is coming back. But we just need to be more strategic about it. The trade also, I mean, obviously there's issues of currency fairness, which has contributed to some of the loss of jobs, and there's been issues of trade deals not being as fair. I mean, that's definitely part of it, but I don't think that's the whole story.
I don't know, I've worked in a couple different fields. The only ones with manufacturing was turbine manufacture.
Right.
And I just remember in the wind industry, we were getting literally raked over the coals by the Chinese.
Right.
And everything from, underbidding all other tower manufacturers on the price of their steel.
Yep.
Ordering back-to-back converters, which is, it's basically cleans up your juice, your electricity from the wind turbine to send it into the grid.
Right.
But it's about a $400,000 or $500,000 piece of machinery
Yeah.
of electronics. And they would order like 100, and for the kind of companies that make these, it's like order of 100. I mean, Christmas is coming early.
Yeah.
But then after they receive the first 4 or 5, they cancel the rest of the order. They reverse engineer what they've already got,
Yeah, no, that's...
and they kill the company. And I've just seen it repeatedly.
And that hurts not just American workers, but what they're doing is anti-democratic, because China is subsidizing basically exporters and companies at the expense of their own middle class. Mm-hmm. And I do think having fairer trade deals and not having IP stolen and not having dumping into the U.S. is not just necessary to help American workers, it's actually necessary to help people around the world fight poverty. Because what you have, in my judgment, in some of these regimes is cronyism, where they're helping elite exporters at the expense of their own general population. And they're denying them access to technology. Look at Silicon Valley. I mean, ask Google or Yahoo or Facebook how difficult it is to get into China or in some of these other countries. People ought to have the free flow of information and access to the world's best products. So I do think part of it is fighting for a more level playing field.
Now, this is kind of tied into trade, but we're both Californians
Right.
here, and we've obviously noticed there's a problem with water in the state.
Right.
And when we play that out to the bigger United States, I mean, let's say, you go to Congress this year, the Ogallala Aquifer runs out of water in about 8 years in the Midwest,
Right.
which is, of course, going to affect food prices pretty dramatically.
Right.
I've I've worked a little bit with the agriculture department on some vertical farming projects. I know the government's behind that, but I haven't seen any like killer apps or solutions as to how we're going to get through some of these problems. And I know, building desal plants in California seems like it's a non-starter for some reason I don't fully understand.
Right. No, I mean, I think we'd have to do that, and Feinstein had a bill that hasn't gone anywhere. We have to look at, I mean, Jerry Brown talked, about connecting the water and in the Delta and being able to invest in the infrastructure in California. 8 years in, we haven't been able to do that. So I think part of it is a question of getting the political will behind some of these projects more than a question of what the solutions are. People know that there has to be a better connection of the north and the south of the water supply. We haven't been able to build anywhere there to be able to do it, and we haven't had the funding from the federal government. But I don't have more ideas on that than, I don't know if you have ideas.
No, I don't have ideas. I mean, because like many things, it's all about the capital that can be put into it and where you're going to get the capital from. And I think a lot of people have a mistaken notion that if stuff gets really bad, then we'll start doing it. But the problem is when stuff gets really bad, the capital flees, and then you have nothing to build it with.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's like you look at a country like Venezuela, it's not that Venezuela is low on resources, it's that all the capital fled Venezuela over 8 years.
And you know this with California. I mean, our secret was so simple, right? We invested in infrastructure and we invested in public colleges. And that paid off big time. And we're not making those simple investments now. And the question is why aren't we doing the things that the rest of the world is copying as a state and as a country? We basically had free markets where we believed also in strategic investment in infrastructure and education and giving people a shot in helping industry and basic research and development in universities. And the platform sounds so cliched because that's what built America, but yet we're straying from those basic values.
Why did we do it, and how do we fix it? Because, I'm not sure what the education's like in San Francisco. I live here in L.A.
Right.
And, LAUSD sucks.
Yeah.
So it's like we're creating this two-tiered society or three-tiered society now where there's people who can afford to send their kids to private school because they're going to go on to the Yales and the Princetons and the Harvards. And then there's the magnet schools. So a certain percentage of fairly people from meager means are going to get to go to MIT if they're bright enough.
Yeah.
And then everybody else is stuck in like pre-prison training in our public school systems, which aren't giving kids either safety or skills to navigate the future world when they get out.
Well, this is the big challenge, right? I mean, because for as much as we rail against Wall Street, and there's huge excess, and as much as we rail against globalization and the excess and unfair trade deals, the bottom line is how is someone in East San Jose or East Palo Alto going to have the opportunity to work in the new economy? You go to Facebook, you go to Google, you go to Apple, you go to Intel, and they're not extraordinarily diverse places. And the question is, how are we going to get people the skills to compete in a largely knowledge-oriented workplace that's going to be necessary, even in manufacturing, even in other jobs. You're going to need technological proficiency, creativity, arithmetic, writing skills in a way that public schools have.
A liberal arts education.
A liberal arts education, absolutely. And it starts at preschool, right? I mean, we, at least I had parents, I'm sure you had folks. My parents, they read to me from when I was 2 years old. They were immersed in education, and so by the time you're 4 or 5, you have a huge head start in the opportunities of life. How do we create that opportunity for folks early with parenting, with support, with a real investment in people getting the right skills, and then how do we do that through K through 12? I think is one of the big challenges for this country.
So how do we do it?
Well, one, we need fundamentally more investment in preschool education. I think there has to be an expansion of Head Start. I think there has to be support for parents who are working 2 jobs, 3 jobs to help them with parenting, help them understand the opportunities for their kids, and have massive intervention before the age of 5. And there's a lot of research. James Henkman, Nobel laureate at Chicago, has done article after article about how early intervention pays off. He's a free market, conservative guy, who's talked about the investment in early education. Second, we've got to make college or some form of higher education seem attainable. Now, I took out loans for higher education, and it was always what was expected. But there are a lot of people who, from 5th, 6th, 7th grade, they think, well, that's just not affordable. That it's not what I'm going to do. And I think we've got to get to a point where it is affordable. Robert Reich has a great proposal, which I like, which is to say you go to public college for free, but then you pay it back as a % of your income once you graduate. So some form of getting people to realize that now K through 12 is not sufficient. They have to have a higher form, some higher education. And then in the curriculum in schools, going to more collaborative models and understanding life skills and what it's like to start a small business.
That's the one thing. I mean, they're financially illiterate when they graduate, and they have no concept of the law, either business or generally common law, and no idea how to read a spreadsheet, no idea, I mean, even what compound interest is for a lot of people. And these are the things that especially victimize the poor in our country. Yeah, anybody who makes under 20 grand a year is paying 15, 18, 19% interest on things.
Right.
That's inexcusable.
And people have got to be a little bit more entrepreneurial about not just, okay, I'm going to start Apple computers or a business, but how are you going to, in a new economy, be able to make money? Some people will be able to do it on the internet. Some people are starting their own small business. They have to market themselves. So a basic understanding of financial literacy, about taking risk. I've got some of the brightest students at Stanford, but one of the things that I think they haven't done is failed enough. I always tell them, look at here are all my failures. I mean, you read out my resume selectively, but there's I
didn't read all the failures. But then nobody wrote any articles about the failures.
So but that's and this is, I think, something where the next generation is so idealistic, so brilliant, but there's a tenacity that built this country that we've got to instill in the next generation about what it means to be resilient, to be able to fail, to work in teams, to collaborate, to have financial literacy, and how do we get that learning in our high schools, because the reality is that the skill set that we're going to need in the 21st century is very different than what we needed in the past century. And
how long will this skill set be necessary? I mean, everything I've read on the coming wave of automation and the number of jobs that'll be just simply rendered obsolete. I mean, driving, number one job for men.
Right.
And everywhere I'm reading, not going to be no more driving jobs in 10 years.
Right.
Okay, what are all those men going to do?
And
what is everybody going to do?
And see, this is the basic. I wish the presidential election were talking about these real issues. We've got automation, race against machines, talked about how so many jobs are just going to be done by machines, driverless cars.
Surgery in 10 years.
And yet you've got globalization. And so when you say, well, why is there such an income disparity? Part of it is because the people who are adept with machines, who can get on a flight to London or Singapore or India, are doing really well. And there's huge technological progress. Some of them are not bad people. They just happen to have the right skill set, the right opportunities. But the people who are being displaced, the question is, how are we going to give them opportunity? Now, there's several things. One is, I was talking to a bus driver, and she was saying, her biggest job wasn't just driving the bus. She'd have gang members get on the bus at times, and she'd be a counselor to them, and she would have a homeless person there, and she'd make sure they could sleep the whole night. So there's a service element to some of these jobs, where even if we go to driverless vehicles, doesn't mean that we take away some of the service aspect, and especially with elder care and child care and service jobs, and how are we going to make those affordable jobs and good paying jobs? And I think society needs to think about that.
How are we? Because when I look at it, I mean, my wife got a compound fracture a few weeks ago, so I've spent 3 weeks taking care of her kind of full time, and I think I'm really lucky I can do that because I work from home, so I can try and balance things. But other people, I mean, everybody is one small mistake or accident away from insolvency, and without the ability to climb back out of it for many people.
Absolutely. I mean, people in car breaks down, and that could take you to a position of bankruptcy or
$500, a lot of money for the average
And or in my area, the cost of living, $3,000 just to rent a one-bedroom apartment. And the challenge is some of these jobs just aren't paying enough, and so we have to, I think, as a society, there's talk of a potential universal minimum threshold of income, which actually Milton Friedman and James Tobin, the liberal and conservative economists, said, look, there's got to be some threshold of income in this country. Massive expansion of the earned income tax credit would get you there, or where you have jobs that are supplemented by an income because people realize that we've got to have supportive opportunity. We need to, I think, prioritize full-time employment. I mean, Yale did this, actually. I mean, there was if you talk to the president at Yale, he said he prioritized for dining hall staff who were part-time. They got first priority to get full-time jobs. So there has to be a recognition with those who have succeeded that, look, no one is saying that you're evil or you're causing harm, but you have benefited from the same trends that are creating dislocations. And if we don't address the structural inequities, then you're going to see the type of potential xenophobia, the type of anti-immigrant sentiment, the type of polarization that we face in our country. And so we all have a social responsibility to say, how do we help those who haven't benefited from the trends that some of us have been fortunate to benefit from? And that's what this presidential debate ought to be about. And what it, unfortunately, and I don't have all the answers. Anyone who says they have the answers is lying.
Oh yeah, no, there's no 100% answers on any of these.
But it's not. People aren't even asking the right questions. There's just okay. People are left behind, and let's blame China and let's blame Wall Street and I wish it were that simple. We could fix every trade law in this country. We could fix every regulation on Wall Street, and we're still not going to solve the basic structural problem that afflicts us, which is that that there's transformations happening in the society, similar in some cases to the Industrial Revolution. 50 years it took in the Industrial Revolution afterwards to have equity. How are we prepared to address these structural changes? And what are people's solutions? I think that's the debate this country needs to have. Instead, what we're seeing is understandable frustration because there are huge changes in our country. But on the optimistic sense, no nation, I think, on earth has ever been as diverse as we're going to be. Right? I mean,
I think almost as we already are.
As we are.
I mean,
and if you want to talk about the real American experiment, which is that we're a nation of ideas and not a nation of blood and not a nation of a particular religion, it's the 21st century that's going to test that. Because up till now, we haven't had that incredible diversity. And so if our generation, if we figure it out on how to make this more inclusive, then we're a model for the world. That's American leadership. That's attaining something that's going to be remembered in history, the sense of a first universal nation. But the challenge is, how are we going to get there? And there's a lot of structural dislocation. So I know that it sounds, where's the beef? What's the concrete ideas? But the point is, we first got to start asking the right questions. What are you going to say? If I could ask the presidential candidates a question, I'd say, what are you going to say to the person in East San Jose on how they're going to have the type of future that your kids, or hopefully if I have kids or my nephews, are going to have? Now, my nephew was visiting today, this past week, from Cleveland, Ohio. I'm a huge Warriors fan. He's a big Cavs fan. So he came out. We took him to the A's game and, things you do with kids. And what did he want to do? Well, he wanted to go see Facebook, and he wanted to go see Apple, and he wanted to see Google. And he wanted to take pictures there, right? So he's going to be fine, right? How many 11-year-olds have that opportunity?
Yeah.
And he's going to have the horizon of possibility in front of him. But what about folks even in my district who don't have that horizon? East San Jose,
they don't even see that horizon. They don't even know it exists.
Right. Now, so you have candidates railing against currency manipulation, and yes, that's a problem, and unfair trade deals, and all the excess of Wall Street. But is that speaking to that kid in East San Jose about his future in a world of globalization and technology? And I think that's what the debate ought to be about. How do we speak to those folks with concrete solutions? And unfortunately, I think that's what's missing in the presidential debate, and that's why people are turned off.
Yeah, no, it's strange when you watch, really not just this year, but any other year, as
Right.
weird as this year is,
Right.
the really relevant issues are never discussed. I mean, I felt like in 2008 when Obama was elected, there was a bit of a mandate for him to do something on the climate
Right.
and on carbon emissions,
Yeah.
and nothing was done.
Right.
And now we're reaching the point where, you know, I don't know if you are part of the Hansen, you know,
Right.
ideas is like we're screwed
Yeah,
and it's
yeah.
coming really fast,
Yeah,
or
or-
we're screwed and your kids are going to have a problem when they're 50.
Yeah.
But it seems to be moving very fast. I mean, we're already 1.5 degrees Celsius up, temperature-wise globally. The oceans have never been as warm as they were a year ago. This year they're going to, you know, break even more records. How quickly do we have to move, and how quickly can we move to do something about this? Because this is something really, for you being in Congress, this is totally an issue that the Congress has to lead on. Because the president never will. They're just always distracted by whatever the crisis of the day is. But this is a permanent crisis.
And we know one of the things we need to do, which is price carbon, right? I mean, you're not pricing carbon properly. And so I have said, obviously, we should have some tax on carbon, on emissions, so that you actually include in the price of carbon the pollution that it's causing. And the question is, how do we build the case that this is something that, we will, in the long run, make us competitive, because America is great when we make the investments in leading the technology that's going to be there for the next 20 years. And how do we tackle and get serious about climate change? But again, this question is not one of not knowing what to do. I mean, people will say, look, you got to have some price on carbon to let the markets work, or you've got huge subsidies the other way. And you're right, it's really a huge threat to the planet, a threat to equity around the world. You know, the first people who are going to be hit, I mean, just bluntly, are people in the poorest parts of the world who don't have the ability to just relocate and or flee an area if there's flooding. And we have always, I mean, the great thing about this country is we've always been a compassionate nation, a nation that leads and says we're great, but we also want to see the rest of the world do well. And I think that's what we have to summon in this country about why should we care? Because it's the right thing to do. And America's stood for doing the right thing. And we just need more leadership, more voices. And I'm confident over the long run the country will make the right choice. But it's going to take more advocacy from people like you and others.
Well, what are the issues I'm not talking about? What are the big things we need to be aware of that are approaching quickly in the future, both economically or environmentally or infrastructure and resource-wise, that we really need to devote time to? And do you have any novel ideas for any of these that they don't need to be proven? It's not something you have to defend yourself against in 4 years in a debate. Just free thinking. What are some of the solutions we can use?
One, I mean, in terms of just the reform of our basic politics, right? I mean, I think most people who go into politics go into it for the right reasons, but there's a corrosiveness of trust, right? Most people, when you say I'm running for Congress, they don't ask my platform. They say, why are you doing it? Why do you care? And there has never been a greater cynicism about public life. And so to me, how do you get rid of some of that cynicism? When you have 98% reelection rate for incumbents to Congress. I mean, it's staggering. I think we've got to have a dramatic reform on access. You know, when people make it on the November ballot, they should have broadcast in every congressional district 3 or 4 debates where you get on to the local news and you get the opportunity to present your case. Because right now, there are only 50 seats or 60 seats out of 435 that are even contested. Yeah. And most people will tell you they can't run because they can't raise the millions of dollars to even get their message out. So one is, how do we create opportunities, which a lot of other democracies have, that you can get noticed? You can get
mandatory voting? Would you support mandatory voting? Or maybe just not doing it on a Tuesday on a work week?
Absolutely. Have the day off. Or, you know, that Bruce Ackerman and Fishkin have talked about creating what they call a deliberation day. Just take the day off, get people involved, and maybe 6 weeks leading up to that, have a requirement that people can participate in a public debate, and candidates have an opportunity to reach folks. I think the other thing is these PACs and lobbyists. I mean, that give money. Again,
yeah, I guess I did forget to point that out.
Well,
you haven't started a PAC. You haven't taken any money from a PAC.
I have not taken money from a PAC. I haven't taken money from a lobbyist, and I don't plan to when I get to Congress. And I've pledged. I've told the editorial boards, if I take PAC money or lobbyist money, call on me to step down. Not because, and I don't. It's not a holier than thou thing. I don't think people who take PAC or lobbyist money are bad or evil. It's that there is such cynicism, right? You take this PAC money, and then people are already saying, okay, is he influenced? Is he not influenced? Is she influenced? So just let's get rid of it. Let's get rid of the PAC money. Let's get rid of the lobbyist money. Let's get people in there who are more independent. Obviously, the Citizens United decision where people don't even know. I mean, the independent expenditures coming in. I mean, even Sanders had independent expenditures. Everyone. There were independent expenditures on behalf of both my opponent and me last cycle, because there's no control. Some of the independent expenditures end up hurting the candidate more than helping. But it's gotten so out of hand. So the reform of politics, and I think to the extent Bernie Sanders, I think, had a very compelling message where he struck a chord, it was this frustration with the process. And I'll tell you, even locally, Santa Clara, the local party, and there are a lot of great people there. But we came in first in the primary. They recently had this county meeting. Well, the incumbent was allowed to come. The challenger wasn't allowed to come.
Yeah.
So there's just this. There's
game playing.
There's game playing
at the local level, all the way to the top.
And it creates. And so people just say, well, all right, I won't get involved. I can go start a nonprofit. I can go make a difference in so many other ways. That's my biggest fear for this country, is we're going to have a generation of people that are just going to opt out of public service, opt out of wanting to go into politics, and say, I'm done with this. And the reality is, government still matters. Congress, I mean, we are making decisions of trillions of dollars of war and peace. You go overseas and they'll tell you, wow, the state of Iowa can shape the destiny of the world, right? I mean, we still matter in such a profound way. And it's a shame that we're not getting people to answer that call to service, because their system has been so designed to protect incumbency. And if you look at, the fall or the stagnation of society, I think it's when you stop to see the change and the vibrancy, and entrenched interests get too comfortable. And that's where I think that the good that's come out of this presidential election has been a cry from the country saying, enough. These institutions need to change. And you see challengers and others saying, we're trying to cut through the system. So the reform of politics, I think, is fundamental. And second, which we've been talking about, is understanding, in my judgment, and people disagree, I believe we're in a very unique economic time for the country. And I believe we're in a very unique social time. On the economic time, I think the automation that we've discussed and global competition is putting some people who have gone to the right universities with great opportunity. It's the most cynical, I don't want to be too partisan, but one of the most cynical speeches I saw was Donald Trump's son, very articulate guy, railing against elite graduates having attended Wharton. I'm saying here, come on. If someone said to me, "Ro, you went to Yale, would you say it's a good thing?" Yeah, it opens doors. But
there's been an unnaturally large number of presidents who went there.
But so we're there's this false sense of not recognizing that there are people who have had great opportunity. What separates our opportunities is we got great shot at life because we had parents who cared, because we were exposed to technology at the right time, because we got to go to a great public school or the right institutions, and how much more important those opportunities are going to need to be for everyone. Because the reality is we're in a very competitive environment. We're in a world where we're competing with machines and competing with other countries, and how the obligation, my aspiration is for Silicon Valley to say, not, okay, what's good for Google or Facebook or Apple, but we have been such privileged beneficiaries of these trends. What is now our obligation to make sure that other people have some of these opportunities and some of the things that we've had? And that debate in a bipartisan basis, because if you care about American competitiveness and you care about American greatness, you ought to care about making sure people are adjusting to that structural change. And then finally, I think is the question of an American identity, and what is that going to look like? Because like you, I mean, you've of course served our country at the highest and most honorable level, and I think that's the highest service one can render. I grew up, I was born in Philadelphia. I was a bicentennial baby. I grew up idolizing our Constitution and Declaration of Independence, the sense of a common American identity. And it seems like that is going to be the challenge for our generation. What is that common American identity going to look like? Which is respectful, inclusive, diverse for faith, but still have some common American bond. And I think that we're struggling with that because we've had such dramatic social change. You got this guy with an Indian background running to represent Silicon Valley, and we've had an African-American president, a woman. We're going through rapid social change, and yet a struggle to find this common American identity. And I think that the rapid social change combined with the rapid economic change is why the country is so polarized. And it's a time that cries out for leadership. And the hope is we'll get people answering that call.
I hope so. I mean, I do worry about it. I worry that maybe the technology and the communications technologies as they work now is actually breaking down leadership even more. Because when you think back to like the 1950s and 60s and the free speech movement as well as civil rights, there was control over who could publish a book. There's control. There were only so many people that could be on the one of the three television networks. Yeah. There were, the megaphone was confined to a small group of people. Right. And now everybody's got the megaphone. Yeah. And there's that certain base monkey human instinct of, that guy thinks he's better than me, and I'm going to pull him down and humiliate him. Yeah. And that tends to happen a lot in the online. And I have yet to see a modern political movement anywhere in the world, frankly, with modern technology that is not a totally atomized movement that actually has real leaders. And I'm thinking back to Ukraine. I'm thinking back to the multiple color revolutions in Eastern Europe and around the world in the last 10 years. Right. And that has deliberation, right? We were talking about, before we went on air, this idea that you used to have reasoned debate and dialogue. I post on Facebook. I could post the longest op-ed or put stuff up about the economic transformation, and we'll get 20 likes. And I'll post a picture with something cute, and we'll get 400 likes, and it'll go viral. And so we've become such a culture online where 30 seconds, we don't want to have as much debate and reasoned debate, and that's what built our country. When people sometimes they say, "Oh, Ro, you're such a nerd," I say, "Well, it's nerds that built America in part." I mean, Madison was a nerd. Jefferson was a nerd. Lincoln, you go read his speeches. I mean, it's masterful. And there was a time of argument and debate and folks, But I'll tell you, we've always been a nation of jackasses. Because at the same time we're thinking about these, there's also William Jennings Bryan. At the end of the 19th century, there's the entire know-nothing movement. We've had, it's been intellectual thought coupled with courage and bravado and boldness, but it's been guided by reason, and it's been guided by people disagreeing and disagreeing honorably. And that is, I think, what we've got to get back to in public life, which is to say that, you can have, here are the big questions. We can disagree about how we're going to address them, but let's have some common purpose in getting there. And for whatever reason, it seems that the tone of our politics is so suspicious of the other side, so
corrosive in their motives, so much that the reason all that part doesn't even cut through.
I feel like we're a victim of the growth of cable news and partisan media in the late 80s and early 90s to the point that we can't even agree on reality. Like right now, I feel like the Republican Party is running against chemistry and physics, which is it's a hard election for them to win like that.
Right.
But they're not accepting fundamental pieces of reality because there's an alternate universe that they watch that says, no, chemistry, that whole thing about molecules trapping heat reflected off the Earth's surface, I don't buy that. That's a conspiracy of 97% of the Earth's scientists.
But if you believe, and here's my view, and maybe it's Pollyannish, but if you believe we're in growing pains as a country, which I do, which is to say, yes, you have the internet and now everyone's empowered, and maybe in the beginning that will mean that there's some voices that aren't as well informed that are going to have a louder say than they would have if everything had to pass the editorial board discretion of the newspapers. Fine, that's going to create noise and make public debate harder. But in the long run, if you believe in the free marketplace of ideas and that the good ideas eventually prevail, I think we'll get there. I think we will have the reasoned debate prevail and more people have the opportunity to participate. It's just going to be a longer process. And I think what we're facing as a country is this extraordinary challenge with how public communication works, this extraordinary challenge with technology. I mean, in the long run, the fact that we have all this technological innovation is great. I mean, the life-saving diseases that can be solved, the access to information, people have more information today on Google and Facebook probably than the president had at a certain time in our country, right? So a lot of this will empower the middle class. It will empower the world, but we're facing all this structural problems with it right now. And similarly with the country. I mean, if we could really be a nation where people coming from India and China and Vietnam and they're all recognize this common identity. I mean, think about how powerful that could be in the 21st century.
I think to a large extent people do. I mean, I'm biased because I grew up in the military, and the military has always, in the last 40, 50 years, it's kind of been a leader in immigration in the country. And I think a lack of military service and a lack of the draft, and not that I'm in favor of the draft, but there aren't these mechanisms that get people from all over the country, from every ethnic background, to live together the same way the military did, so that you experience everybody as, we're all kind of essentially the same. And we have it somewhat in collegiate sports and some high school sports, but that's not the same kind of level.
And think about, look at
the
district I'm representing, right? Asian American majority. You've got people, they're Japanese Americans, Chinese American, Filipino American, Pakistani, Indian Americans. These countries have gone to war in the 20th century. And yet here they are in Silicon Valley. No one cares about that stuff, right? They're all living together in this common American identity. And so if we become that nation that has managed to have people leave behind their prejudices, their ancient histories, their ancient battles, and offer this vision of people finally unified around common human principles, that's going to be such a force for good in the world.
Well, that's what European Americans went through about 100 years ago.
Yeah,
with the massive influx of Slavs and Italians and Germans and Jews into the late 19th century, and everybody thought those are not Americans. Like my own family, my dad's family came from Russia, and we were illegal immigrants.
Right.
We stole someone's passport and made it to America.
Yeah.
And no one accepted us at the time. People didn't accept anyone at the time, but it works out in the end.
I ran into Governor Pete Wilson, who I've disagreed with on everything.
Boy, he really destroyed the Republican Party in California for multiple generations.
But you know what? There was one point I found him extraordinarily eloquent when he talked about his grandmother. I said, Governor Wilson, what do you mean? He said, well, my grandparents came from Ireland, and they were being persecuted by the British. And they came here, and she was a housekeeper at a hotel, right? So there's this story that all of us have, most of us have, of some form of immigration that drove us here, where we weren't part of the in-group, we weren't part of the successful group, and yet through sheer grit, hard work, resilience, we did that. It was the European story, and now it's becoming the universal story. And if that becomes America in the 21st century, and we figure out how to get the public debate right, and we figure out the economic transition, then we're probably going to create a society and a nation that has been unprecedented in human history. And that's American exceptionalism, right? That's the American greatness. That's the Athens of the world. That's our legacy to the world. And that's, I think, the extraordinary optimism and promise that we have. But the challenge is, can we just get the politics stuff right? And I'm optimistic we will, but it certainly seems like this cycle is an impediment to that a little bit.
My prediction is Trump's going to lose.
Yeah,
barring a mass casualty terrorist attack,
yeah,
or a economic collapse set off by Italian banks or Portuguese banks. But I don't. That could happen before November, but I doubt it. But I think what's dangerous is he set the stage for the next guy who comes after him, who maybe won't be so sloppy and foolish and full of pride, but will have real malevolence and really believe a lot of the crazy shit that comes out of Trump's mouth.
And the question is, are these, if there were these, what Trump, I think, tapped into is these latent frustrations and of the change that's going on. And the question is, how do we address these in a positive, optimistic, forward-looking way? And can we, and to the extent that there were ideas that were exposed that are false and wrong, will Trump's defeat mean that those ideas were defeated, or are they still lingering out there? But to the extent that this stuff has come out and that it's being debated and it's being addressed, and that the anxieties over the structural changes are there. I mean, let's be realistic. There's still people who are uncomfortable that we had an African-American president.
There's no question. They're like 30% of the population.
And let that come out. Let's debate. Let's have an honest conversation about, the country is going through profound change. But if we can assure people that the new immigrants, the folks who've come here a little recently, that they share that same love of America, that they share that same sense of our great role in World War II and in defeating communism and in civil rights, that there is still a much greater allegiance to that common American project, then I think over time we will build that trust. It's not going to happen overnight, but nothing great happens overnight. And so I think these are just growing pains for a nation that's dealing with a lot of change. But it's still extraordinary because you don't have this in any other place still in the world. It's not that you go to, I would challenge, for all of Europe's lectures, I'd let them elect an person of African origin, president of France or prime minister of Britain. We are still a remarkably open society. And I tell my liberal friends, the same country that has nominated Donald Trump as one of the leaders of presidential candidates also elected Barack Hussein Obama twice to the presidency. So,
and frankly, I think they would a third time if they had the chance right now. I think the majority of people would
or Michelle
re-elect
Obama.
him.
Maybe they don't like it.
I'd vote for Michelle in a heartbeat. So let's get into some of the. Because if I don't ask these questions, there's going to be all kinds of YouTube comments of, oh, you didn't want to ask him that.
Yeah,
so,
tough.
Fracking in California, yes or no?
No.
I like that answer.
Right.
Offshore drilling in California,
No.
yes or no? TPP?
No. And I'll tell you why on TPP. Couple reasons. One, the tribunals that have been set up, I think, is more of a play to multinationals than workers. And that hurts not just workers here. It's going to hurt working people everywhere. So it's not, when people say, oh, it's protectionism, or that's not the question. The question is, where is the balance? Are you for people who are in the middle class and working families in the United States and around the world, or are you just for corporate interests? And I think the balance has been too much towards corporate interests. The second thing is the IP protections. I mean, I think there was too much of a handout to the pharmaceuticals, places other parts of the world need.
How much time do you think a company should have exclusive rights to those IP? I mean, I've been in a few IP industries, and I know whoever wrote Snow White in 1929, you know what? Disney can stop collecting the money.
Yeah,
it's part of the culture. They shouldn't own the IP on stuff like that.
I think certainly much less than they do now. And when you look at pharmaceuticals, I mean, yes, we need basic investment in research and development, but not at the expense of depriving people of certain life-saving drugs, which is what would happen with the pharmaceutical industry. I'd rather we put more money in the National Science Foundation, National Institute of Health, funding the research in the universities, helping companies do the research, but not the intellectual property. I think is skewed way too much towards corporate interests. So the tribunals, the corporate interests, and then finally, it's like tin air towards the conversation we've just been having. We've been saying, look, there are all these people who are being left behind with globalization and automation, and then you come back and you say we want to even accelerate it more. No, let's first figure out how to give folks an opportunity to compete. If once we have more people in the middle class, then we can talk about other opportunities. But we can't keep privileging the same group of folks who are the winners in society to become bigger and bigger winners. So,
well, how do we break down that? Because for me, I think of money like it's got mass, okay?
Right.
So the more money you have, it's like gravity. It's going to suck more money in.
Right.
How do we create an anti-gravity device to stop the way the money's flowing so that it's just continually, you know, to have money, you got to make money.
Right.
So the more you have, the more you're going to make.
Right.
How do we turn that around?
Well, then, and this is you're basically saying what so many economists, Piketty, right? That's his whole book, is that the biggest way to have money is to have capital, right? You have capital, and the rate of return on capital is more than even the rate on return on human intellect and on hard work. And that's the challenge of that is how do we get capital more into the hands of individuals, and whether that's through community banks. I mean, I would have, of course, you know, I have great respect for the president, but I think one of the in the whole recovery, the way that went, it was too tilted towards the bailouts and other things being tilted to the banks and Wall Street, and we probably could have done a better job of having more of the funding go into lending in banks that would have gone more to Main Street. I think a lot of that fueled the Sanders insurgency, where the sense that that people were just not being part of this of access to capital. They're not part of, you know, there were these committees where you get to approve a CEO's pay by board of directors. They all know each other, and they're making gazillion times more than the average employee. You know, there's these structural inequalities that absolutely need to be addressed, and I think that has to happen at the same time as the skills and the education component, and I think that was raised well in this cycle.
Now, thinking about it, I can't remember the name of the book, but Samuel Huntington's last book, where he talks about
the Clash of Civilizations, or no?
No, after. Like 2-3 years ago, it was about organizations, and that each organization, whether it's the Congress or multiple departments that we built for our government, they're built for that time period that they came about. And over time, all structures decay, and their focus shifts.
Right.
What new organizational structures do we need in the United States, and which should we maybe get rid of?
That's a great question. That's a great question.
I know there's no preparation, and
it's
not
an
issue in any of the things, but we're nearing that point where we've gone through such fundamental society change in 50 years, yet we have no new organizational structures to deal with it, to respond. Instead, we're using stuff that, like, we'd only been out of using horse and buggies for 20 years when we developed most of these structures.
Well, look, I'm going to throw something out. I haven't even thought about this, but the fact that, you know, we haven't increased the members of Congress, for example, we've got the same 435. Is that something we want to reconsider? Get more voices in there, or more Senate? I mean,
or how about the structure? When you go, you're going to be representing one of the wealthiest, most knowledgeable districts in the United States. You will have less power than, you know, Congressman, you know, Jim Bob from Okefenokee, Arkansas, who's been sent back there, you know, 30 years in a row.
The seniority is the the lack of the thing that shocked me about starting in this political journey is the total, at times, seeming the lack of meritocracy, right? I mean, in almost everything else, sports, for example. One of the reasons we love sports is because it doesn't matter who you are, where you went to school. You're either the best player or not. You get a fair shot at it. The only thing we dislike is when the refs call things incorrectly. But there's a sense of merit, right? And that's certainly true in so many parts of life. And in politics, it seems the longevity and who you know and who's funding you seems to have greater and greater weight. And that's, I think, again, why people are turned off from going into politics and why people feel like their voice doesn't matter. How we change the structure, I mean, whether obviously it's through campaign finance reform or through giving people more opportunity and changing the part of seniority, I think, system in Congress. And I think, though, that it's not going to happen. It's not that I'm going to go to Congress and do that. That's going to happen when...
Yeah, they're unlikely to say, God, well, that's a great idea, man. Why don't we
just go right to the top in a self-serving proposal? But I think what's going to happen is when your viewers and people say, look, we're sick of the institutional stagnancy. We're demanding this change. And it's out there. I mean, it's not to be underestimated how much, and we were talking about that, how much committed people can still do in changing parties, in changing leadership.
Yeah, and let's talk about that for a minute, because there's a whole group of never Clinton, I'm done with the Democratic Party. But how many votes did you lose to your opponent to the last time? It was like 2,000 or 3,000.
Yeah, it was 4,000 some votes. If 2,000 people had switched, we would have won. If a few thousand more people had gotten out to vote, we would win. And the reality is, when you look at this, our system, it's, as all the flaws, it's still extraordinarily open compared to other parts of the world, right? And so, and the internet and others have made it possible. If someone is inspired and they get 1,000, 2,000 people supporting them on Facebook, on Twitter, that's extraordinary. I mean, we've seen this with Obama's campaigns. So the opportunity to impact politics is enormous. And as you know, I mean, you go to a Democratic club and you get 20 friends to show up there, and you do that for a year every month, you're probably going to take over the whole club. And so there is a opportunity, I think, to have impact. And I hope people don't get just disengaged. And the other thing is, look, I'm a progressive, I'm a pragmatic progressive. And I think good leadership is always pragmatic. And, everyone cites, obviously, Lincoln as this great leader, but one of the things was he was very pragmatic. He cared about the Union, he cared about ending slavery, he was pragmatic. And I think the art of politics is having ideals, but then being pragmatic of how to further those ideals. And so I don't have, for the people who say, oh, never Hillary or others, I mean, I just think, look, you've got a choice in which direction the country is going to go. In my view, it's clear that Hillary would be a better president than Donald Trump, and we've got to operate within that realm.
Yeah, but you like stuff like running water and electricity, so...
But, you can go, but for those who were disillusioned, look, there's nothing to say you can't organize and have a candidate in 4 years, or 8 years, and that change won't come. We're in such a fluid time in our politics, and no one can predict the next year, let alone 4 years.
No,
so no one would have predicted Obama's rise. Certainly no one would have predicted Trump coming out of nowhere. So or Sanders. I mean, so there is such possibility because of all of this change to actually have an impact much sooner. And this is where I think I go back to my grandfather, where we started. And when people say, okay, you've been at this and you lost and you're running again, and you look at people who have made huge impact. And my grandfather, he spent over 30 years, right, in the fight for India's independence. And he didn't know what the outcome would be, but he just fought for what he believed. And in America, I mean, you look at people, frankly, like your father, or people who served, or people who have, with civil rights, these were not things that they achieved in 2 years or 4 year cycles. They dedicated their lives to a cause. And I think that the progressives who have been inspired for things they believe in have to say, look, this is not a 2-year or 5-year project. This is a 30-year project. And if they have that commitment, they will change the country. It's just, it says opting out is the only way they won't.
Yeah. No, I agree. Well, Ro, thanks for coming in.
I
Thanks
appreciate
for spending
it.
some time with us.
Thank you for your time.
Can you tell our viewers how they can get involved and help you out and either do anything from volunteer to phone bank to
That'd be great.
contribute?
Well, I would love if folks could go to our website, www.rokhanna.com, or our Facebook page, Khanna USA, or tweet at us. If folks can go to our website and support in any way, whether that's signing up to volunteer or contributing or helping share likes on Facebook, it'd be a huge help. And obviously, when you're running as a challenger, breaking into politics, it's one of the hardest things to do in getting a start. And so I'd be really grateful and honored for any support at any level.
Well, thank you very much for coming in. It's been a really enlightening conversation. I hope you come back after you win.
I'd be honored.
And do another interview with us.
That'd be great.
And you've been watching Young Turks Interviews. Thank you, and good night.